Hi, everybody. So yeah, I'm this is actually so 2023 is my first year at OSU's Dry Farming Project. It's been a personal interest of mine for a while, just ever since I got interested in agroecology and all that kind of stuff, and uh, seed breeding and land races and everything. So we can move on to the next slide. That's just an introduction showing a bit of the field of our sorghum. So this is talking about kind of the origins of uh, this little program that we made up called AFRI, which there's a USDA program with one A, so I decided to make it two A's. But it was originally focused primarily on African crops because essentially my family background is from Ethiopia, from northern Ethiopia, and a lot of farming. And this picture is actually from southern Ethiopia, but it's not too different from what you see a lot of places in the north as well. And dry farming of a lot of staple crops there is just a traditional peasant practice that has been relied on for years. And so both the germplasm, i.e., the plants, the varieties and crops they grow, as well as their methods, are completely adapted and have been shaped over years to reflect this and to work well with arid or semi-arid environments where water rainfall can be difficult, but you still that's the only real irrigation you can rely on is from rainfall or subsurface moisture. So really, after visiting family in Ethiopia and seeing the countryside and seeing the way things are done there, I really wanted to bring more of this kind of perspective and the methods and also the seeds and the germplasm from Africa and later also from other from Asian countries as well, uh, that just haven't been explored as much. I think partially because dry farming research in the United States is a little not super new, but it's still a bit niche. It's kind of breaking out of that a bit now, which is great, and I'm very happy about that. And so I think one of the good parts about that is it can help us diversify a little bit, and there's a lot of great things to be gained from working with African crops and perspectives and Asian crops and perspectives. So we can go to the next slide. And you can see in the background there, that's kind of a more landscape view of what a lowland dry land farming area in Ethiopia where I mean it's not close up, so it's hard to tell, but that's sorghum that they're farming in big crops. Sorry, in big plots um, in these dry land areas. So basically, our the main goal of this program is to introduce, select, and breed crops and varieties from African Asia that are little known or underutilized here, and that diversity of choice is really important for farmers, I think, and being able to control what they want to grow and kind of helping break out of the Monsanto giant, or not Monsanto I guess anymore, but the various kind of corporate seed things and all the problems that come with that. And uh, so part of it is giving farmers more control, but also just giving them things to grow that are less water reliant, because in the coming years we're going to have to be more and more cautious about how we use water and more conservative with how we use water. So we need to develop strategies and varieties and crops that are good for these kinds of arid environments that we're going to be dealing with. I have been heavily using the USDA's germplasm resource information network, which is kind of their seed bank basically, and it's got tons of really amazing land races and traditional farmers varieties, and also improved varieties and various other things from research and just from all around the world, and that have been collected for some of this stuff is over 100 years old, and I think they just kind of replenish the seeds so that it's still good. But Yeah, we're really interested in I'm really interested in land races and these traditional farmers varieties because, like I said, they've been kind of geared over the years just through selection by these farmers because they know what they want in a plant and they're selecting that out, and they have these arid conditions that they'll have to deal with. And so they've been able to really create some great varieties that have really high chances of success in the United States. And they just haven't been tried because a lot of people aren't culturally familiar with them. And a lot of the dry farming knowledge in America that we know of kind of, I think, has its origins in Native American dry farming, which is a really awesome practice and fascinating stuff. Uh, and but at the same time, there hasn't been as much, I think, of a focus on African and Asian dry farming practices, which are probably about as old and very similar to in many ways, but there's some interesting differences and things we can learn from. So next slide, please. So this is one of the first main crops that we worked on, and it's going to be in following years one of the big crops because it's just such a significant crop for dry farming and really in the entire world. It's the fifth most consumed grain in the world, but very few people in America eat it. It's very nutritionally complex and dense. It's a great grain. It's great staple food. Extremely drought tolerant and heat tolerant. Grows in marginal soils. It has these huge roots that can just penetrate through soil and break it apart really well. So it's often things that it's one of the crops in Ethiopia, for instance, that's planted on virgin soils that haven't that are just really not great and haven't been tilled or anything like that. But in the United States, there's a few people basically in the South and the Midwest who grow it for livestock forage, and an even smaller number who grow it for syrup production. And that's really it. And one of the big problems is maturity times and day length sensitivity, because a lot of the varieties are longer maturing and are sensitive. There's a whole thing where a lot of people claim that sorghum needs to think. I think I've heard people say 12 hours about is what it needs to, or yeah, 12 hours is when it needs to start flowering. Although I found that this is really not a solid rule, and it's very, very different for pretty much every variety. They all flower based on their own limbs. And I think there's kind of a combination of genetic and environmental factors. We haven't really had time to study that as much in detail, but that's one of the things I hope to in the future. But yeah, and another kind of complication with sorghum is that the the big white flowery seeds are the greatest for human food production, but they're also really great bird feed, and the birds love them. And so red sorghum, it has tannins in it, and brown sorghum as well. And it's not attractive to birds, but it's also not great for humans to eat unless you ferment it. And so there's all these practices that have developed in various places for consuming fermented sorghum, uh, and avoiding the bird damage that way. So we, on the right, you can see this is a variety from Chad, uh, and kind of not sure if that's technically sub-Saharan Africa. They're basically in partially in the Sahara and partially sub-Saharan, but in any case, it's this is our probably our earliest maturing variety. Obviously, it's a very nice red variety, so no bird damage, and it's kind of small seed heads, but really good tall vegetative growth with no irrigation, and so it was very successful. But I think let's go to the next slide. So this is really, I think, the standout variety, and we're going to be doing a lot more sorghum trialing actually, because uh, we have a whole project we're working on next year to look at tons of new varieties. Anyways, this one is I'm not sure on the pronunciation of a lot of these. Kuronienie, or however it's pronounced. It's from a part of Mali near the border with Guinea. So this is actually not a very arid part of Mali. Northern Mali is really the arid part. This is kind of almost humid. But somehow this variety did amazingly dry farmed. At first I was worried because it was tillering a lot. And then the stalks all ended up being relatively the same height, pretty tall, not too tall, but kind of manageable, and easy to cut, big panicles. And each plant produced about 4 to 6 panicles, and each panicle has about 3.8 to 4 ounces of seeds on them. And so you can understand how that can be a very exciting thing as an alternative to perhaps corn, where this is a field. As you can see, the vegetated growth in that field is ridiculous. We watered it basically once when we planted it, and then it was really dry, so we did a very light watering, I think 2 weeks after that, and that was it. And this is in September, and they're just doing great. The only ones that didn't do great were just the ones that were too late, basically. But we really had some great success with a few of the varieties, and so I think I'm very optimistic and excited about looking at more sorghum varieties in the future. Um, so let's go to the next slide. And here's just some pictures of it at harvest time. Um, Probably go to the next slide. Um, and here's just kind of some demonstrations of in Sudan and Ethiopia how it's kind of traditionally used. Kisra is basically a flatbread made out of a fermented sorghum batter. Ethiopia, we make injera, normally out of a grain called teff, but in certain lowland dry areas, especially poorer people, will make it out of mashilla, which is what we call sorghum, or sometimes millet as well. And that's also a similar fermented flatbread. And here are these pictures in southern Ethiopia in a region called Konso, which is very famous for its sorghum. Is they're pounding sorghum into a paste, fermenting it, then they're making it into beer and drinking it out of dried gourds. Konso is a very traditional area. So this is a lot of places. Sorghum beer is a bit more commercialized in other parts of Ethiopia, but this is kind of the traditional side of it. And in America now too, there's also commercial sorghum beer producers. So that's a good market that you can work with, and you can grow red sorghum and stuff like that, and it'll still be useful. So I think we can move to the next slide. Yeah, let's talk about sesame for a bit. Sesame is another crop that really, there's a few people that are growing it in Texas and California, and it's really a lot of these varieties. Obviously, a few people grow them in America, but for me, it's also more about bringing them to northern climates and regions. So the Welkite Humara region, which is part of where part of my family comes from, is this kind of semi-arid region. In northern Ethiopia. And I'm going to speed up a bit because I'm running out of time. I always do this to myself. Um, but yeah, there's some really great varieties of sesame. It's very uh, drought tolerant and productive, very pollinator friendly, even with the native bees. Uh, our one little problem is the dehiscence. The seed pods like to pop open when they mature, but there's some varieties that we're working with. We had some Russian varieties that had some resistance to that and that were very early maturing and yielding well. So let's move on to the next slide. There's a nice picture of flowering sesame. Next slide. This is Humara, where my family comes from. It's my mom's family. Some of the white sesame, which is very expensive commodity. It's sold mostly to Israel and China. Next slide. Cowpeas was another big one. They're a great intercrop with sorghum. They have kind of all the same drought tolerance, and they're also amazing nitrogen fixtures that can grow in soils with almost no fertility. They have tons of diversity in terms of like ones that sprawl, ones that are little bushes you can plant super close together, ones that are more for like almost a ground cover, ones that are great for livestock. There's all types of ones, and we're going to do a big study of this coming up on varieties as well. So that's kind of, you can see a cool purple one that I had to show off to everybody because I love the color of it. So that's great. So next slide, please. This is just another picture of it. We can just kind of go through the slides, really show quickly because I'm pretty much out of time. These are some of the really interesting melons. Central Asia, great area of diversity for melons. Yeah, we have some really interesting ones that we're trialing. And yeah, that's kind of, can keep going. The next slide. This is the variety that we got that was really good. We're going to keep working on that and looking for new ones from this region. Next slide. Next slide. That's just map Central Asia. This is kind of showing the long-term storage ones. They have ones that store for up to like 8 months, I think. So that's one big thing we're looking into. Next slide. African rice and upland rice is kind of a new thing. You guys can read through this actual PowerPoint in more detail later. I just wanted to kind of flip through it so people can see the pictures and stuff. This is an old picture of a rice farm in Sierra Leone, upland rice, dryland rice. Next slide. And so finally, kind of for next year, we're working with Dr. Shahan Gahar, who's a forage person, but he's very interested in dry farm forage. So we're going to be working on looking at some African and Asian dry farmed forage crops that are also human food. Also, we're going to have we actually just got approved for a grant that I'm very excited about. That's looking at African and Asian sorghum, melon, and cowpeas, and breeding and selecting interesting land races varieties from that. And we're just kind of also just looking to learn new things and source new information and be connected to new people who have knowledge about this and introduce new crops. Like fonio is an interesting one that I've been trying to find stuff about. Mung beans is one that we're doing a little bit of interesting work on. So yeah, it's really, I think there's some exciting stuff going on. And I guess you can go to the next slide. I think is the last one, is it? Yeah, that's just, like I said, the forage thing, with a lot of dry farm crops, you can kind of release your livestock into the field after you've harvested and it can serve a double purpose. So it's that's just a nice picture of a traditional farming practice in East Africa. And is that the last slide? I think that is. Yeah. So I think I kind of ran out of time. So yeah, I guess we'll move on to the next people, but thank you for listening to me. Sorry, I went over my time a little bit. Thanks.